So welcome to the Moving Teacher. So our guest today is Tory. Tory has a lot of experience, not just living in Korea, but being part of KOTESOL, where he was a former president, and we got more involved.
Mm.
So thank you, Tory, for being part of the Moving Teacher. So tell
My
us,
pleasure.
oh, you're welcome. So tell us more about yourself. So I always start off the questions with how did you got into teaching and how did you got to the country?
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep that short and to the point. It's a little bit long and convoluted otherwise. I guess it starts with my mother, who was an English teacher, an ESL teacher in Canada for most of her career, and that sort of got me interested in teaching. When I was in middle school, I said I'd never be a teacher, but then later on, I went, oh well, maybe teaching wouldn't be so bad, especially if I could travel a bit and educate as I was doing that. So when I finished my BA in history and then I did a 1-year B.Ed in my local university, there were no jobs in my home province. I'm from Prince Edward Island, the east coast of Canada. Really hard to get a job there. And then the JET program, the Japanese Exchange and Teaching Program, came up as an option. So I got on a train and traveled to Montreal and went to the Japanese consulate, interviewed there, and I was pretty sure I got the job, but I wasn't exactly sure. But anyway, so I interviewed, I got a job, taught middle school in Japan for 3 years in Okinawa, the southernmost part of Japan, and went back, got my master's degree, and wanted to come back to Asia, ideally to Japan, but it was very hard to get jobs outside of Japan. And one of my best friends was in Korea at the point, and he said, "Oh, you should come to Korea. It's almost as good as Japan, close by. Nice people, salaries are decent." And I went, "Oh, okay, why not?" So I interviewed, did a telephone interview from the California office of the YBM chain. And at that point, I just completed my master's, of course. So they were ecstatic because they didn't have a lot of people with master's degrees who wanted to work at a private institute. So I got a job teaching adults only, got a private apartment in Seoul, and was happy doing that for a couple of years. Wrote a textbook, co-wrote a textbook series for that school, and using that experience and my connections to a previous boss, I got an interview at my current job, the Hanyang University Seoul campus, and they were happy with my interview, I guess, and got a job here back in '98. I taught freshmen for just a minute, 98, 8 years. And then one of the people in this department, the English language department, knew me from us co-teaching a course and said, we really want you to come over and work in our department. And they said, oh, well, you'll have less hours and the same salary and some other perks. And I went, oh, sure, why wouldn't I want to do that? So I came over here and discovered with my colleagues there was no program. It was kind of a bunch of random classes taught by various people in various departments, and went, we kind of have to create a program here. We got to create something that connects. So we created level testing systems, and we created criteria for the classes, and we kind of tried to interlink things from the soft freshmen up to the seniors. There were a few hiccups along the way. For example, they didn't want us to have prerequisites, but we were like, how can you do, sophomore if you haven't taken the freshman course, and these kinds of things. So there were a few things that were a bit, what's the word, a bit concerning along the way. But after some meetings and some discussions and a few, negotiations, we kind of came up with the platform and the course work that we have now. It changes every few years, so of course we have to keep recalibrating things, but the basic program is kind of in place, and we've been developing that over, what is it now? I guess it's about 15 years now we've been doing this particular program.
Wow. No, thank you. You gave a lot of great information. Uh, and I guess I do want to touch in the part with what is the difference between living in Japan and South Korea for you? Because I know a lot of people want to travel around the world, and
Mm-hmm.
each country's gonna have their pros and their cons.
Well, I was in very different places in Japan and Korea. I was in like the southernmost part. Okinawa was kind of it's traditionally going, I don't want to bore you with history, but it was its own kingdom at one point called the Ryukyus, and then it was invaded by the Chinese. And then they kind of kept that secret and kept the relationship with the Japanese, kind of like Hawaii in the States, I
Yeah,
guess. It has that similar historical background. So I was kind of, off from the mainland, and I enjoyed teaching. It was quite interesting being in that part of the country, but it's not the same as mainland Japan, I don't think. But having said that, I'm in, of course, the capital in Korea, which is where most people want to be, and most of the English teaching is in the country. But so there are some differences in terms of the places I was. Keeping that in mind, though, I think Japan and Korea are very similar in some respects in terms of their, well, certainly their difficulties with English, the pronunciation issues they have, the L's and R's and PV's and F's, for example. That's one thing. And of course, their focus on the testing, on the language testing, the TOEIC, the TOEFL, the IELTS, and that huge exam in high school where they have to compete to get into the best university. So I would say the countries are similar in some respects. Their ideas about foreign cultures and the way they relate to foreign people are similar, and their cultural history is somewhat similar, although of course Korea and Japan wouldn't want to agree with that. They would disagree quite strongly on how similarly they are, and they argue about things like dokdo, the islets, and who first had the cherry blossom trees and various other things. So of course they wouldn't agree with that, but in terms of the English teaching environment, I find them to be very similar. In terms of the cultural experience. In terms of the jobs, well, it's much harder to get a long-term position in Japan, from what I've heard, than it is in Korea. So it kind of depends on what you want and what you're looking for.
yeah, and that's the one thing, because I know with Korea, it's always easier to get a job. They're hiring like year round, but with
Mm-hmm.
Japan, they're hiring, but you won't start till January, February, which is weird. So you'll apply in the summertime, but you won't actually start your job 5, 6 months later, and by then you're not sure if you might even want to go by then.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And of course, with the pandemic and the various documents they require, people are finding it harder and harder to get positions, I think, as a result of that.
What do you think students usually struggle with in learning English? Is it like speaking? Is it writing? Is it hearing? I know in Korea, from my experience, students would speak more. The writing was good, but I know when I was in China, because students didn't have much exposure to like Western cultures, they would be scared of speaking and then hearing. But the writing was decent. It was okay. It was good.
Mm, mm. Yeah, the productive skills are often the hardest ones, I think, for Koreans. I also do IELTS testing on as a side gig, and yeah, that the research is consistent. They're better at the listening and the reading than they are on the speaking and the writing, because they're productive skills and they don't have the experience or the exposure to the language in many cases. And as I mentioned earlier, they're usually studying for a test. They're studying for the TOEFL, they're studying for the TOEIC, they're studying an IELTS test format. They're not often studying an essay in school. We spend, we used to spend 3 courses. Now we spend 1 course teaching them the basics from a paragraph, sentence, all the way up to writing an essay, because most of them have never written an essay in English except in a test environment.
Yeah, no, and that's true. But I know you did. I know you did talk about IELTS, TOEIC. Can you just give like a brief description of what that is? Because I know for me, I know what that is. I know that's
Mhm.
for them to show that they know English. But
Oh
like
yeah,
for
sure.
those that might not know,
Well, the IELTS is the International English Language Testing System, and they have a 4-part test: listening, speaking, reading, writing. It's a little bit different because the general training offers, it has different, as I recall, it's different reading and writing, and the academic, again, has different modules for that, but they do the same speaking test in that case. So the IELTS test is offered around the world. It's a Cambridge, British Council, and IDP in Australia. They collaborated.
So yes, so if you can just tell us of what IELTS. I know you didn't mention it, but the screen was the internet connection. But
I understand.
what were you with the remaining?
So the IELTS is the International English Language Testing System. That's what it stands for. And it's administered and created and managed by Cambridge, the British Council, and IDP in Australia. And it's a worldwide recognized test with components in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And it has a general test for people who are looking to get a job, and also an academic test for people who are looking to get into a school overseas. So you need to get, normally, at least from what I've seen, you have to get roughly a 6.5 or a 7. The 7 is what's accepted for a Canadian immigration applicant, and also to do nursing, for example, in Australia, you also need a 7. To get into a university might be a little bit lower, although normally the Ivy League and the higher level universities require at least a 7 on the IELTS to accept students.
Oh, thank you for the great information. And I know you're part of KOTESOL. What is that, and how do you get involved, and how can others get involved within KOTESOL?
Well, KOTESOL is an open organization. You can attend a meeting, any one of the meetings at any chapter in the country. It's free to attend. Obviously, if you attend regularly, we would like you to become a member. An annual membership is 50,000 won right now, so it's about $50, which sounds expensive, but when you think about the publications, you have a regular magazine 3 or 4 times a week. We have 3 or 4 times a year. I'm sorry. We have the various research journals and proceedings for conferences, and then you discount on conference and stuff as well. So it's very easy to get back most of that membership in discounts on various things that we offer. So KOTESOL, we have the chapter level. So there are chapter level events, mostly online right now, of course, because of the pandemic. But there are regular symposium. There are chapter monthly meetings. There are conferences at the chapter level. Then there's a national conference, which is normally in the spring, although the dates have been moved around a little bit because of COVID. I think it's in the fall this year. And then next spring, we're doing the international conference, which is usually in the fall. And that's the big one. We get like 1,000 people coming in from all over the world. And some of the biggest names in English language teaching have presented or done plenaries at our conference at one time or another. Jack Richards, Dave Sperling of ESL Cafe, Jeremy Harmer, David Noonan, anybody you can think of, any of the big names, both current and also from the past, have pretty much been to our conference at some point. So it depends on the person. It depends on how much involvement they want to have. But I mean, you can become a chapter level volunteer and take on a position, everything from president to member at large. You can take on a position at the national level. We have committees and volunteering committees for the conferences, committees for publicity, committees for another one. But anyway, we have various committees, of course. Oh, the elections committee. So we have committees and various levels of involvement. So if people want to get involved, there's always an opportunity to do so. And the networking opportunities, the friendships, professional development that you can get as a member of KOTESOL, I think is priceless. I mean, it's something that anyone who wants to stay in Korea any period of time, or even people who are thinking of leaving Korea at some point, if you want to get some insights into what's happening in the field generally, both at the local and the international level, then KOTESOL is a great thing to get involved with.
And then, how have you grown while being with the organization?
Well, I started out at the chapter level, I was the secretary of the Seoul chapter for, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years. And then people suggested I become vice president because the president was thinking of leaving, and they wanted me to train up for that. So I became vice president. Then I was president for 2 years. And then I took a break for a year, but then I was pulled in to do elections for the national level. And then they suggested that I run for president, or for vice president, sorry. So I ran for vice president. And at that point, if you were elected vice president, you automatically became president the following year. So I would love to say it was all planned out, and I had this long-term plan, and I went, yeah, I want to be president of KOTESOL, but it really wasn't that way. I was just, no, I want a community of other teachers, other professionals who I can learn from and I can exchange ideas with. And that was how it started, really.
Yeah, because I know when I was in Korea, I started to know more about KOTESOL towards the end. Because in the beginning, you're all like, "Oh, Korea, let me explore." But then for me, at the end, I was like, "Wow, there was like a huge organization." And it's important to get involved. And as you mentioned, you meet a lot of people, and there's a lot of resources.
Yeah,
And then,
networking, number one, networking. I mean, if you're looking for a job, joining KOTESOL is a great idea, because people will tell you, oh, my university is looking for, or I heard about a Hagwon that's looking. I mean, we have a jobs board, of course, as well for members, but often that's how you hear about jobs or opportunities coming along, is through networking or through friendships or people you know in the organization. It's a small, it's a big organization in one sense, but it's a small group in the sense that everybody pretty much knows everybody else after you've been there for a certain period of time. And if you know someone in the organization, well, of course you're going to recommend that person, because they're dedicated and professional, and they're interested in being a better teacher, rather than the ones who, not to knock the Hagwon teachers, but people who go drinking every weekend and don't really want to be a professional teacher. Well, you probably don't want to recommend those people quite so easily to take on a position at your university or organization. So it's very useful in a lot of ways.
no, definitely. And I wish if I was in Korea, I would join KOTESOL because it's a lot of great benefits. But hopefully, others do join and learn a lot. Uh,
Mm.
and I do have another question. I know you did a lot of publication. I know for some people they might not know what publication, like what got you into publication and what is it?
Publications, well, I mean, I'm a professor, right? I teach at a university. I'm not tenure track, so publications don't really benefit me in that sense. I mean, I get a point or two towards my renewal, I suppose, but I'm not getting huge amounts of money for publication. But it's two. There are two reasons. Number one, it was kind of accidental. People were like, "Oh, you presented on this topic. Would you write an article for the magazine? Would you write an article for our local chapter?" And I went, okay, sure. Why wouldn't I do that? So it was a stepping stone. It went from that to, of course, when I did presentations for the conferences, then there's a proceedings, and they need you to write up a short, kind of detailed, but a kind of short explanation of what you did. And that's the next step. And so that's, of course, expected, and most people do that. And then I do some writing for EFL Magazine, which is an online magazine for English as a foreign language, English as a second language teachers. That's also volunteering. And I just write about stuff that I think teachers would be interested in knowing about. So I like writing. It's something I enjoy doing, but I like doing it in a variety of different ways. So I don't want to just write one style, because it gets boring to write one style, right? So I write the EFL magazine stuff is online, so it's more short and to the point, and more broke down into talking points or key tips. And then I teach research writing. I teach a research writing course that our students used to have to do for their graduation paper. And they don't have the graduation paper anymore, but we do teach it because if they're going to graduate school or do some more studies, they kind of need to know how to write an APA or an MLA style paper. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to teach research writing, I have to prove that I can do research writing. So if I don't publish some and look and show my students, okay, this is what it looks like, this is what a magazine looks like in publication, then I kind of feel like I'm faking something, right? Teacher, have you ever written research? No, I teach it, but I don't actually write. I mean, how do you feel as a teacher if a student comes along and says, well, you're teaching this, but do you really know anything about it? Well, I just felt like I had to kind of do that to prove to students that, yes, I do know how to write research, and this is what the process is like. And I also did some volunteering, of course, but I did volunteer reviewing for a couple of different journals, one in Cambodia and another one, international journal, where I gave feedback and reviews for articles they were planning on publishing, which is kind of how I got a sense for what research journals want from a writer, and certainly helped me when I was doing my own writing of research articles.
No, yes, because that's the thing. Because I know in some of the job postings, it'll say publications. So for me, I thought it was just writing like a whole book of information. But no, but you said it perfectly. You're trying to write. It could be long, short. It doesn't matter. You're trying to get the right information in, and trying to create different types of styles. But I guess any other advice would you give to anyone that wants to teach in Korea or wants to travel or anything that maybe we haven't talked about?
Well, I guess it really depends on what you want. If you're looking at Korea as a short-term temporary place where you're going to come and try out a new culture and save a few.
All right. Sorry if you can just, yeah, we're having some technical difficulties, the Wi-Fi. He's in Korea, I'm in the US. But
welcome to the wonderful world of international Zooming.
Yes, exactly. And for those that are teaching online, hopefully you know the struggle. But I guess what advice would you give to anyone that wants to teach in Korea?
Yeah, I would say, okay, so I would say it would depend on your plan and your goals. If your intention is just to get a year or two under your belt and try out teaching and see whether teaching is for you, then yeah, I would say Korea is great. Come get a job at a Hagwon private institute, probably going to have to teach kids because sadly that's where most of the jobs are. But you're probably going to get a private apartment out of it, and you'll probably get some experience teaching. And learn about education face to face, which is the best way to learn about teaching anyway. If you have a longer term plan, then maybe you want to get a position in the EPIC program, teaching public schools, and you have to go through a slightly different process to do that. But that's also perhaps a little bit more stable than a Hagwon position. And obviously, most people want to work their way up if they're going to stay here for any period of time. So the dream job is people always say at the university. Maybe that's not true for some people. Lots of people are happy with a long-term elementary school or public school teaching job if that's what they want to do. But many people like the freedom that university offers, because of course you have a lot less teaching hours, and you have the vacations, of course, where you can travel and you can do some professional development or other things that you might want to do. The problem with the Hagwon jobs or the public school jobs, not so much public school jobs, I guess, but the Hagwon for sure, you're not going to get a lot of vacation time. You might get a week or two vacation time, not including standard holidays a year. And that's not really enough time to do justice to traveling around very much. The public schools who get the summer school and winter school holidays, which will give you a bit more time to travel and do different things. The one thing that I really love about teaching in Korea, other than the teaching, of course, is the vacations, because unlike North America, they have the Korean summer and the Korean winter vacation. So even the public schools, my daughter happens to be in public school, she gets a month off in the winter period, and she gets 3 or 4 weeks off in the summer period. So it's a lot more balanced, I think, than the North American, where you get, the 2.5 months in the summer and you get a week off in winter, and and people don't want to go back to school. Well, here that's not true. At a university, unless you teach winter and summer classes, which people do for extra money, you get that 9-week vacation in the summer and 9-week vacation in the winter to do what you want.
Is that the same in Japan? Because I know in China, we do have like winter and summer holiday, which is about within each is about maybe a month and a half to maybe like a 2 month off. Is it the
Mhm,
same in
mhm.
Japan?
No, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure they have an earlier vacation than we do in the summer, but they also have a longer vacation in the summer. So I'm pretty sure it's not exactly the same. I think they get a shorter winter vacation and a longer summer vacation from what I understand.
Okay, no, no, but that's the main thing. Yeah, because you always want to balance work and life. You don't always want to just do go to work, 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 but then you can't just do socials. Yeah, there's a
Mhm.
balance to
Oh, and
uh,
one tip I would highly recommend, read the contracts, read them carefully because there's often some tricky stuff that's added in the contract. And if you really want to do your research before you come, then join some of the Facebook groups like the Foreign Professors in Korea group or the English Teachers in Korea group. I'm part of those two groups, and there's also a Canadians Teaching in Korea group as well, for, of course, people like me from Canada. But I would strongly suggest that if you want to do your research beforehand, don't rely on what's on the internet. Don't rely on Dave's ESL Cafe or those places as much. Join the Facebook groups for people who are in the country and read over the posts and ask them questions and find out what the regular expectations are, so you don't walk into it blind, not knowing what they should be offering to you when you come here to teach.
yeah, I will also add to that. On the movingteacher.com, we do have a list of all the jobs, career resources, and then I'm doing all the Facebook groups as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Great.
but do your diligence, because this way you can know what are some good schools and what are some bad schools. You can know about the hours, because some schools you may be working from 1 to 9, 8 to 5. Some schools you're working Monday to Friday. Some you're working Monday to maybe Saturday, and it's all going to depend on the school and your
Mm.
schedule and what you want. But do your due diligence and yeah, just research, and you never know. Don't just jump into a contract because you never know. And also, your
Mm.
recruiters, they do work with other schools. So don't think they only work with one school. That's a lie. They work with several others. And I've also made a video on this uh,
Oh, great.
on Poly.
Hmm.
Uh, No, thank you, Tori, for the great information. And I gained a lot of information. I want to go back to Korea and join the TESL.
Well, then I've accomplished my goal, Brian, because of course my goal is to get you to come back to Korea. We can't lose good people. We have to get you to come back.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.